Fourth quarter of 1945. What a year it's been.
The war is over, but we seem to be tumbling from war to war, especially in the European-held colonies.
The Nazi war criminals brought to justice at Nuremberg.
New and improved polymer materials promise a household and industrial revolution.
I'm Indy Neidell.
I'm Spartacus Olsson, and this is War to War News.
Brought to you by TimeGhost, makers of the finest history that money cannot even buy.
The year 1945 has come to an end, and what
an end it was. The fighting in the World War is over, and the boys and girls who served, they're coming home.
Well, some of them are, but it's going to take time to bring home the over 25 million who were in active service at war's end.
Right.
Some will have to stay on location as occupation of the former Axis nations continues, to not mention that millions of Axis soldiers still remain in POW camps as the war ends.
And while the homecoming has surely been on everyone's minds on both sides of the conflict, the news has continued to be full of reports of the Axis atrocities committed in both Europe and in Asia. But now the reckoning is to come. On November 22nd, the first Nazi war criminals go on trial. And there's something novel with these trials, new kinds of crimes. For more on that, here's our reporter Sebastian Brandstetter.
Thank you, Indy. The first big new thing is who deals out justice. This is not a traditional victor's justice negotiated around a table. There will be a trial. In Nuremberg, the Nazis must answer for crimes deemed universal, beyond political systems or cultures. For that, a new institution has been created, the International Military Tribunal, led by Associate U.S. Supreme Court Justice Robert H. Jackson. Like in many typical trials, a panel of judges presides, but this one is unique, composed of judges from the Big Four: France, Britain, the US, and the USSR. Then, the others have added two new crimes on top of the already existing legal definition of war crimes. First, crimes against peace. Attacking another country, even with a proper declaration of war, is no longer a sovereign right but a prosecutable offense, with political and military leaders personally liable. Until now, only states, not individuals, could be held accountable. It even goes beyond the leaders of a state, though. Under the new regulations, soldiers and bureaucrats can no longer use the defense that they were just following orders or hide behind their positions. The second new crime is crimes against humanity. The Nazi war of extermination exposed the world to unspeakable acts performed on an industrial scale. In response, the tribunal asserts these crimes must be prosecuted. Significantly, these laws enter into effect retroactively, so that even such crimes committed before the war can now be prosecuted.
Sebastian will be back to cover the progress of the trials as they are expected to run well into 1946. Trials for crimes committed in Japan are also expected to begin in 1946. The news from that part of the world this last quarter has focused more on an Allied act, though.
The dropping of the atom bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki back in August. The world now lives with the knowledge that we can destroy entire cities with a single plane, a single bomb. Many voices of concern have been raised by prominent commentators.
Albert Einstein's reaction was that the time has come now when man must give up war. It is no longer rational to solve international problems by resorting to war. In October, author and political thinker George Orwell expressed fear that when the atomic bomb ends up in the hands of all major powers, a new Cold War will grab the world in a firm, long-lasting grip.
Atomic bombs or not, fear of another global confrontation and the desire to find a way to institute a means for peaceful resolution of strife between nations has been on the table of the major Allied powers ever since the USSR and then the US entered the war in 1941.
The result came in practical existence now in October with the creation of the United Nations. That international organ to preserve the peaceful coexistence and sovereignty of all countries was founded as an extension of the wartime coalition of the United Nations alliance fighting the Axis.
Since the four main powers of the alliance, China, Great Britain, the USSR, and the US, had the greatest say in the creation of that body, it's very much a construct on their terms. All four of them and almost as an afterthought France, now hold council and can, in effect, use their veto to block any decisions made by the Assembly that would curtail activities by themselves or by their allies.
Not only does the newly founded UN face these structural issues on paper, in practice, it seems that the maneuvers in Eastern Europe by the USSR under Joseph Stalin have the potential to escalate into new conflicts over borders or sovereignty. Here's Sebastian for details.
Thank you, Spartacus. A lot of tremors currently run through Eastern Europe while the Soviet Union manages the territories it liberated from Nazi tyranny. Publicly, all seems well as Stalin pushes his concept of people's democracy. In theory, people's democracy promises the harmonious cooperation of democratic and communist factions in these regions. However, in practice, worrisome rumors are spreading. In Poland, for example, Polish communists who had spent most of the war in Moscow returned with the advancing Red Army and quickly were placed, unelected, into critical administrative posts. As in the other Soviet-occupied countries, this is the Ministry of the Interior, which controls the police. Opposition leaders have then been put under pressure and surveillance, and violence or imprisonment are perhaps not that far over the horizon. Remember, Stalin never recognized the Polish government supported by the West, and the Polish Home Army was disbanded by the Red Army back in January, with the fate of many of its soldiers remaining unknown. Also, the first post-war election results in Austria did not bring the communist success Stalin had hoped for, which might indicate that the same will happen elsewhere in Eastern Europe. Some now caution that all this is a ploy to give a communist takeover a democratic guise, and that is only a matter of time before Stalin drops the facade when it does not succeed. This all remains to be seen, and we can but hope for the best.
But the Soviets are not the only ones who struggle with their regained territories. The European colonial empires also are recovering from a war that, in many cases, saw them robbed of their colonial possessions, and now they want them back.
There is only one problem. Many of their colonial subjects have different plans. Emboldened by the UN Charter's promises of self-determination and fueled by the rage and frustration brought on by decades or centuries of subjugation, they demand what they believe to be rightfully theirs.
These tensions are already creating full-out war in Southeast Asia. In the Dutch East Indies, Indonesian separatists are now fighting forces from the Netherlands, Great Britain, and Japan. Yes, you heard me right, Japan.
That will never cease to amaze me.
In Indochina, the Viet Minh have begun their revolt against their colonial masters, whether they be Japanese or French. But there is conflict in other parts of the world as well, and the British Empire is no exception.
In Mandatory Palestine, Jewish settlers rebel against what they call British complacency towards the genocide of their people. At the same time, the Arabs again voiced demands for independence and against a Jewish state.
In India, which contributed to British victory with its blood, sweat, and tears, many are asking, why?
Already in August 1941, the possibility of these developments and how it would impact the world economy was brought up by then U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt in discussions with then British Prime Minister Winston Churchill.
But despite such fears and despite the continued wars, the economies of the victorious powers have not tanked.
No.
Sure, compared to 1944, there has been an overall contraction. Great Britain's economy shrunk by 1.62%. The Soviet economy lost 5.3%, while the US GDP went down 1.7%. But that's really effects of switching away from the war economy.
After overcoming German occupation, the French economy even grew, gaining a full 8.5%. The Axis powers have, of course, fared significantly worse, with Germany's shrinking by 31% and Japan's by 24%. Record-breaking contractions. But again, these are war consequences, not future fears.
Yep. Despite that the overall trend in GDP was negative for the year, the prognosis for 1946 is bullish. The stock markets have reacted positively to the end of global war, with gains in Paris, London, and many other places. In the US, the Dow Jones ended the year up by 27% compared to last December. In short, there's economic optimism, at least in America and Europe, though even the Soviet Union is gearing up for economic growth. Much of it is driven by the prospect of rebuilding. But also, we're seeing the spoils of war entering the civilian market.
Spoils of war? You mean all the stuff the Allies are confiscating from the defeated enemy nations, like industry, rocketry, weapons technology, scientific discovery, scientists and engineers.
There's that, but it's more the technological and scientific progress during the war that is already starting to enter civilian life.
An atom bomb for every household.
No, I'm talking about things like transportation, new household appliances, communication technology, and so on.
I know that. I mean, basically, new stuff is coming your way. And at the center of it all are polymers. Plastics, huh? Plastics. Much of this was already in development before the war. And while supplying the military diverted such technologies away from private life, the war needs also accelerated research and development in the field.
Companies like DuPont, Dow Chemical, Monsanto, and many others are hard at work to bring out revolutionary materials like polyethylene, a variety of thermoset polymers, or nylon.
Everything from furniture to household appliances, kitchenware, even your home itself will soon be made with bright and shiny plastic. These lighter, more durable, affordable materials created by chemically induced molecular polymer chains, they're set to revolutionize our lives.
Imagine the garbage problem that will create.
Don't be silly. I mean, who throws away their furniture or their kitchenware? This is more durable than wood, more durable than metal.
Perhaps. Products made with these futuristic innovations are already hitting the market. The biggest seller at the end of 1945 is nylon stockings. First introduced by DuPont on May 15th, 1940, they were an instant hit with the women of the U.S. But only a year or so later, all nylon production went to the armaments and equipment industry.
Now that they are back, sales have rocketed. And that's not the only new thing coming down the fashion runways. But for that, let's hear from our expert reporter in the field, Astrid Deinhard.
Thank you, Indy. Before I went to university, I actually worked for 3 years at DuPont de Nemours. That's a company in Delaware in marketing for polymer textiles. In any case, nylon stockings are back, but there are still many things that are not. Styles this season are starting to ease up from the military-influenced hard lines of the war years, but there are still major shortages in textiles, especially in Europe, of course. That said, the fashion houses in Paris have reopened, and there are early signs of a shift towards a more feminine, more romantic woman's fashion. Hemlines are going down, fabrics are softer, silhouettes are slicker and sexier, and the broad masculine shoulder pads seem to be on the way out. They, on the other hand, are coming into the man's fashion. But the big trend is the influence the global war has had on mixing up styles. In tropical countries less affected by those shortages, the war has brought with it more Western, less traditional styles. In the West, returning soldiers are bringing with them ideas from their stations, like the Hawaiian shirt, kimono fabrics, other printed silks, and things like that. In the Soviet Union, while the focus remains on practicality and fashion is frowned upon as something of the bourgeoisie, the millions of returning Red Army soldiers have launched a subtle, discreet trend of wearing trophy garments. That is, high-end pieces like furs and haute couture dresses for the women and designer suits and coats for the boys, pillaged in Germany and other conquered territory. In the US, the greatest influence is, of course, Hollywood. As the film industry shifts back to escapism, glitz and glamour is all the rage. Back to you, Indy.
Thank you, Astrid. Now, Hollywood at the end of 1945 is in a unique position. In the 1920s, right, the European film industries were on equal par or even ahead of American cinema internationally. But the rise of fascism, films with sound, and finally the war has now left them gutted, while Hollywood has been able to sustain itself, to some degree even thrive. The U.S. film industry is now about to take dominant control of the Western world cinema.
After actively supporting the war effort with propaganda, they are now switching back towards entertainment. Moreover, the climate of public discourse about social issues seems to have sped up the erosion of the voluntary Chinese wall between the industry and politics. Hollywood seems ready to address controversial social issues more broadly. For more on that, we turn to our own very glamorous Anna Deinhard.
Yes, there are songs of change rolling down the hills of Tinseltown for sure. While the epic, heroic movies about the fight against the Axis were still coming out at the end of 1945, there's a growing demand for other stories now. Last year, there were no less than 4 World War II themed movies in the top 10 box office hits. This year, it was none. Although the humdinger of a musical Anchors Away does star Frankie Sinatra and Gene Kelly as Navy boys, but Navy boys lost in La La Land, not firing away at the Japanese Navy in the waters of some Pacific island. Instead, the top 10 box office hits were comedies, dramas, and thrillers set in a civilian world. There was one big shift visible in what pulled American audiences to the theaters: melodramas. A darker, grittier style with troubled characters, nuanced far beyond the heroic prestige we're used to getting. One of them even made the top 10, Paramount's release, The Lost Weekend. Helmed and penned by Billy Wilder, it stars Ray Milland as a writer struggling to overcome alcohol addiction, while he also tries to regain the trust of his wife, played by Jane Wyman, and finish a novel. Not only is Wilder's dark, should I say noir style a stark contrast to the rest of the top releases of the year, but it addresses a social problem head-on, one that has until now been pretty much taboo for the major studios.
What about the rest of the world?
Well, as we said earlier, the film industry in most other parts has yet to recover, but there are films still coming out in USSR. There's fascinating developments.
Oh yeah. Eisenstein's Soviet comeback with the epic Ivan the Terrible.
Yeah, but that's not what
That's what I'm thinking of, though. That's what I'm thinking of.
That's not what I'm thinking of. They have a new genre that depicts the epic heroism of the workers on great infrastructure projects.
Infrastructure projects? Oh, man. That, you just know from hearing it. That's going to be thrilling. It's going to be exciting.
Mm-hmm. About as exciting as watching paint dry while sitting in a cold bath.
That would actually probably be more exciting. Yeah. In any case, unless I'm mistaken, and you let me know if I am, that is all for 1945 from us at the War to War News Studio and the War to War News team. We will return in 1946.
When we will continue to cover the events of the decade that brought man from the brink of destruction to the threshold of the stars. 1/4 of 1 year every week for the rest of 2025. Right here on the TimeGhost channel.
So subscribe. And to be an integral part of this great adventure, join the TimeGhost Army. It is that army that enables all of our creations. Excelsior!